Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another Breakfast with Blaha, and today I'm having Greek yogurt, frozen cherries, and peanut butter. I think I've probably done this combination before. Pretty good. Alright, let's talk about ketogenic diets. This is one of these topics that over the years people go, you kind of flip-flop on. Yeah, and I flip-flop based upon the available data. But it's kind of getting to a point where when you look at the data, I'm starting to really hold a more balanced view of it. I want to like ketogenic diets because I've used them in the past. I dropped 50 pounds on a ketogenic diet when I got sick. When I first got on YouTube, I had already lost a bunch of weight. I'd learned to walk again. I'd spent a year in bed sick. I gained 100 pounds. I lost 50 of it on a keto diet. They're delicious. They're easy to do. Doesn't mean it's the healthiest or the best approach. And I've tried to keep up very, very closely with the science on it because I've always taken a particular interest in that. And I philosophically like the idea of eating a lot of meat. Just like the reason I looked at the carnivore stuff. Philosophically, I like the idea. Doesn't mean that it's a good idea. It doesn't mean it's a good idea. And when we start looking at the ketogenic diet, my friend Alan Aragon, who I've known him a very, very long time, I think over a decade at this point, Alan linked on his website a review of a large review of literature that had been looking at body composition and ketogenic diets versus other types of diets. And what they found was that a ketogenic diet has terrible muscle sparing. People who lift weights lose more lean body mass on a ketogenic diet. They lose more muscle tissue relative to the amount of total weight that they lose, or with similar calorie deficits. Right? It's not ideal. It's not ideal. Now, interestingly enough, it was actually relatively preserving for lean tissue in endurance athletes, but non-lifting endurance athletes. Now, the question becomes why? I think the answer is pretty obvious here. The lower circulating insulin. The lower circulating insulin. Because again, everyone gets caught up in the insulin hypothesis and they forget that it's been debunked. I also forget that insulin for people who lift is more anabolic to muscle tissue than it is to fat tissue. So what does that mean? It means muscles are going to use more of it. So an insulin response to food is not even remotely a bad thing for people who lift weights. Again, it has the bias more towards muscle than towards fat. That's never a bad thing. We could argue about non-lifters who have insulin resistance, right? But that's a different category, isn't it? No one who follows my channel falls in that category. And most of us, if we lift long enough, even if you are insulin resistant, you lose some body fat, that's going to go away. You're not going to be that demographic for a long time. The other issue is the lack of dietary carbohydrate to fuel training. Now, people will say, but can't we do cycling ketogenic diets? Well, it may not be a ketogenic diet for one. Number two, is it going to be enough glycogen to fuel your training through the whole week? Now, people have noticed that I put up at least one screenshot of me only eating like 130 grams of carbs in some days right now on a deficit. And they're like, well, that's kind of lowish carb. Well, for me, that is lowish carb. But am I burning more than 400 or 500 calories a day weight training? Probably not. Hence, we come over to the point of reducing carbohydrate itself to get lower calories isn't necessarily going to cause the problem. It's when we take carbs down so low that we do not have the training fuel to push the training that we need. The resistance training, our conditioning work, all of those things, because that burns carbohydrate. Again, dragging a sled. All right, we burn through some carbohydrate doing that no matter what you do. You're burning through glucose. You're burning through muscle glycogen. weight training as well. So the problem we run into is that our work capacity dramatically drops in the gym. And if we can't train hard enough in a calorie deficit, what do you think happens? Losing muscle. We lose muscle. So we run into a lot of problems with any of this. And here's the thing to remember. What more and more of the data supports is that we have a lot of flexibility in micronutrients as far as an ideal diet for athletic performance, for retaining muscle, for gaining muscle. All right, the ranges are pretty big. We run into problems when we go to extremes, when we are out of balance. Because here's the issue. If protein drops too low, gaining muscle and retaining muscle become far, far more difficult, right? So we can't drop protein too low. And we have numbers on that. I've given you guys numbers on that. And this is the other reason, when we get these other points, why I am saying, well, we need to hit that ideal protein and no more. There's no need to go higher because we're sacrificing other stuff. Now, people say, but you can turn protein into carbohydrate. Sure. Metabolically expensive process. Now, not to say that's not useful when cutting to some extent, but you shouldn't have to rely on it for that. You really need the more immediate carbohydrate. You really should have enough to fuel all your training, and then your body can convert some of the protein for other needs, right? And have it more immediately accessible. All right, carbohydrate drops too low. What happens? We lose muscle. We lose muscle due to lack of appropriate training fuel. Right? We lose it due to lack of appropriate training fuel. So then, what's our last option? Low fat. Low fat has problems too, doesn't it? It's not the hormone thing, by the way. That's been overhyped. But what does happen? Nutrient deficiencies. Without sufficient fat in our diet. In fact, let's come over to the other point. If you're running a really low fat diet, can you even get, let's not even talk about absorption, because people can supplement, in theory. Are you even getting them in the diet to begin with? Right? Are you getting them in the diet to begin with? Or now you having to rely on supplements to get your vitamins? Run it through. Go plug in a really low-fat diet into something like Chronometer. What happens? Man, I'm not getting enough vitamin E. Sometimes your vitamin A, but that one's unlikely. But you start running it through and you start finding, man, I've got deficiencies. Also, it goes too low, you can't absorb vitamin A, E, D, and K. Now that D and K, those are big ones. Those are big ones when we start talking about heart health. Also big ones when we start talking about bone density. Losing bone density in a deficit, not good. So here's the situation we end up with. We really need all three. We need an adequate amount of protein. We need an adequate amount of carbohydrate. We need an adequate amount of fat in our diet. Stop doing stupid extreme diets. That's really your answer. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.